Welcome everyone to this online workshop, Data in the Spotlight, Qualitative and Mixed Methods. My name is Maureen Haaker, and I've been working with the UK Data Service for over 10 years now on everything from ingest to reuse projects specializing in qualitative data. So this workshop today is looking at some of our key data collections and some examples of reuse projects to kind of give you a taste of what it's like to do qualitative work with archived collections. We do have a few activities to go through, and I'm going to talk through some of our collections. So we'll have plenty of time if you do have questions that come up at the end there. Okay. So let me just streamline my streaming so we don't get any interruptions. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get underway then. So here's an overview of what I'm going to cover today. I just want to say a little bit about the broader picture of the UK Data Service so you know where the qualitative and mixed data fit within the bigger picture. I'll give some examples and details of some of our best qualitative and mixed data collections, and I'll try to show you how they've been used in some quite creative ways. I'm also going to cover how to find and access data, and particularly qualitative and mixed data, which does have a couple of resources as well as some tips to help you find what you're looking for. Do be aware that we've got online workshops and lots of materials that go into much further detail about some of the things I'm going to talk about, such as finding and accessing data. We do have some tutorials on that. So this really is just a quick overview. We've found that some people, they'll want a bit of information on some of those topics, but then a little bit further detail on what it is that we're going to cover for this specific workshop. So hopefully that gives you enough signposting to launch you wherever you want to go. Okay, so first things first, what is the data service? Well, we're a comprehensive resource that's funded by the ESRC. Our main job is to be a single point of access to a wide range of secondary social science data. The main purpose then is the collection, ingest, and processing of the data, and further dissemination of that data for other people to use. In addition to the data infrastructure core, we also have a service layer, which provides extensive support, training, and guidance, such as this workshop, for example. Who is it for? We like to think it's for anyone who has an interest in data. Traditionally, our main audience and the people who probably both deposit and use the data the most tend to be academic researchers and students, but there are a lot of other groups that are well represented too, including government analysts, charities, foundations, businesses, research centers, and think tanks. All will give us and use our data. Given the importance of data and how it's used and how it's disseminated, we're trying to reach out to support a wide range of communities. And here's the front page for our website, which some of you may have already seen. This is the top half of the page that gives you a flavor of what we do. The link to the main page is up there at the top, and I'll show you where to find things specific to qualitative and mixed data a little bit later. Yeah. So what kinds of data do we hold? Well, this session is all about qualitative and mixed, but just so you know, the majority of the data, at least judging by the number of collections, is certainly quantitative data. So we hold over 8,000 collections, of which about, just over 2/3 of them, so over 6,000 of them, are quantitative collections. And we hold a wide variety of that data as well. So we have survey data, both cross-sectional and longitudinal, aggregate statistics, domestic, international macro data, as well as census data. So it's aggregate for the year 71 to 2011 and micro data for the select years listed there as well. But of course, today I'm going to focus on our qualitative and mixed data collections. And where does it come from? Well, again, that varies depending on the data type and some of the sources that you see here, including agencies and statistical time series. Those are going to be the main sources for our quantitative data. Most of the qualitative and mixed data comes through individual academics. So many of them are funded by research grants, often the ESRC, not exclusively though, will take data from other funders as well, including the Wellcome Trust and Leverhulme and others. And some is independently funded work as well. And also, of course, for some of the qualitative, originally paper-based materials, we'll hold the public records and historical sources for those. So that includes things like the census. Where we can, we try to digitize some of those old paper-based collections. So if you want a quick way to see all of the qualitative data we hold, we do have a listing for this. You simply click Find Data at the top of the homepage. And then if you scroll down, you'll see some options there to browse and access the data. And you just keep scrolling and you'll end up being able to browse by data type. So right now we have over 1,700 collections that will come up. So this is on a huge range of topics, a lot of different approaches as well. You can also browse data by theme. So there's another area, if you're scrolling through that Find Data page, you'll see that you can look by these themes specifically. This does include a lot of different data types. So if you click on, for example, COVID or education, you'll find that there's a lot of quantitative data sets that are signposted there, but there's qualitative examples in those themes as well. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the collections that we hold, and it'll give you a sense of the range of qualitative data that we hold. So the first study demonstrates the quality and capacity in inclusive research with people with learning disabilities. So this is focus group-based research. Some of the focus groups are with people who have learning disabilities, and some of the focus groups are with researchers who they themselves have learning disabilities and are doing research on those with learning disabilities. So it's very much in the spirit of active research, of participatory research, and of course, a good example of focus group research. Just note here as well that data reuse is a great way to access certain populations, which would normally be difficult to access, whether they are because they are physically difficult to access, such as, for example, prisoners, or in the case of disability, sometimes the research just requires further resources to appropriately safeguard and address the needs of that group. So it may pose some funding or ethical challenges to access that population. So we do have lots of collections that are really great if you're trying to reach certain types of populations. The second item here, Intergenerational Dynamics, is by Jennifer Mason and looks at whether people above the age of 50 consider themselves to be a generation and whether or not they identify as a generation in contrast to other age groups, primarily younger, or do they identify themselves differently? So she's done a lot of great work on these kinds of aging and generational dynamics. And this is interview-based data, and again, very high-quality data. The next one is Chronic Illness and Online Networking, Expectations, Assumptions, and Everyday Realities. This is research on diabetes and the use of Facebook. So just to point out here, with this particular one, we do have a kind of growing collection of data that at least once upon a time would have been considered new and novel forms of data like big data, social media data, those sorts of things. We do get a lot more of that kind of thing now. And this is an example of someone who was using Facebook contacts in order to study how people with diabetes form support groups and how they get their information. So it's quite a creative and different kind of data than the usual interview-based data research. The fourth one down is coalitional presidentialism in comparative perspective, minority executives in a multi-party system. So it's a bit of a mouthful, and it's not quite as accessible as some of the others, but I wanted to make the point with this one that you don't just get individual-based data in qualitative and mixed data. So this study looks at presidential coalitions across a number of countries, and across Europe and Africa and Asia. It makes the point again that even with qualitative research, you can do macro scale kinds of comparative work. And this kind of study is a really good example of that. And the last one there, family life and work experience before 1918, is the founding collection for the qualitative part of our archive. So this one is not new, and we do reference it a lot, but I would be amiss if I didn't mention it. It's comprised of over 400 oral history interviews, and it's widely considered to be the first oral history project of Britain. It's very well used, so I don't really need to promote it, but I just wanted to signpost it as the typical kind of collection that many people probably think about with qualitative data. This is a very exceptionally large collection. So these are interviews, life history interviews with people who were born during the Edwardian era. And some of these interviews are very long, over 80 pages of transcript, and they cover all aspects of these people's lives. So it's an incredibly rich collection. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is give you a quick whirlwind tour of 3 collections that we hold and just tell you a little bit about what they've done and how they've been used. So the first one is The Last Refuge. Now, just to note here, I've put an SN number in brackets there, which might seem a bit esoteric if you're new to the UK data service, but all of our collections have a study number associated with it. So you can find our collections through a lot of other tools, but if you do happen to run across a study number, it's a really quick way to find the collection. So it's really useful to know. So this one is 4750. If you go to our Find Data and start to search in our data catalog and you just wrote 4750, it would come up with The Last Refuge. Okay, so this collection was conducted by Peter Townsend, and it's a major investigation into long-stay institutional care for old people in Britain in the late 1950s. And again, it's like the family life and work experience before 1918. This study was really exceptional for its breadth and range, given the time that it was done. The collection has in-depth interviews with 67 local authority chief welfare officers and with serving staff and residents of 173 institutions. It's also an important collection because of the diversity of content. So it wasn't just interviews, there's also photographs and field notes and diaries. And I think another feature that's quite important about this collection is that the diaries are recorded by both members of staff and residents of the institutions. So this is one of the few examples where there are actual voices of residents of long-stay institutions. So again, you can get the richness of some of the images that are available with this particular data collection, and I think it really helps to visualize more the context of the collection. And the reason this collection is so influential is twofold. One was that it was a pioneering use of qualitative data in the age of in the era of old age and retirement and isolation and services and so forth. Some quantitative work had been done, but really it was the use of qualitative data for this kind of direct policy relevance, which was new with Townsend's work. And the second reason was that this study had major policy implications because Townsend's results challenged whether long-stay institutions were really the best place for the elderly. And I think part of the conclusion of his book was that for many elderly in some circumstances, they may not be the right form of institution. But it also had lots of practical implications in that he recognized that people needed not just criticism, but also some suggestions of where to go from there. So he came up with recommended improvements that institutions could adopt and that policy could adopt as well. So the next study that I want to tell you a little bit more about is the school leaver study. And this is probably my favorite collection out of all of our qualitative collections. And in this case, the original data was collected in 1978 by a researcher named Ray Paul. And this was work that was done with students on the Isle of Sheppey. So Sheppey is an island just off the eastern part of the UK. And Ray Paul had spent a long time studying a lot of different aspects of living and working on the Isle of Sheppey. So he covered topics like employment and education, religion, and family dynamics. So it was kind of an ethnographic approach with a huge range of issues. Somewhere in that process, he got a bit interested in schools and the educational experience. So he found out about a situation where teachers at one of the comprehensive schools were asked to set a particular kind of essay to their pupils just before they were due to leave school. So this is roughly about 16 years old. And I think this is, perhaps a difficult kind of essay, but they were asked to imagine that they're nearing the end of their life and something made them think back to the time that they left school. And they then had to write an imaginary account of how their life played out after leaving school at 16 and the 30 or 40 years after. I think sometimes you ask 16-year-olds, what do you want to do when you grow up? And it is a little bit of a difficult exercise, I think, at that age. But the students did an impressive job providing details, actually really deep details, which allowed a quick glimpse into what some of their expectations were and what some of the realities were of their lives to come. So what we got with that exercise is 141 of those essays, 89 boys and 52 girls. And you can see briefly that there's more that could be done with these essays, but there were a lot of themes of realism, possibly pessimism. Young people would talk about mundane but quite stable and grounded jobs. They imagined very gradual career progression if they progressed at all. There were also stories of stagnation and unemployment, and somewhat morbidly, some predicted an early death, either for themselves or their loved ones. And the quotes there, I think, give you a flavor of that kind of tone. So not all of the essays were quite as strong as some of the examples here, but those were strong themes throughout the data set. So very realistic and very down-to-earth kinds of commentary on their life. So, for example, the boy who said, "It was hard finding a job. I failed a few chances, but eventually got what I wanted locally." Or another who said, "I was on the dole for 6 months after leaving school." So they were on benefits after leaving school until I got a job in a garage. Or a girl on the bottom who said, "I longed for something exciting and challenging, but yet again, I had to settle for second best. I began working in a large clothes factory." What's quite interesting about this collection, though, is that we had a couple of contemporary researchers, Graham Crowe and Don Lyon, who in 2009, 2010, tried another similar exercise. So it wasn't a strict replication because Ray Paul more or less kind of stumbled upon this assignment that teachers had set. So there wasn't as much control over how the essay was put to the students, but it's still a really useful restudy. And Graham Crowe addresses some of those methodological differences in some of his publications. So there's now a new collection of data, which offers a comparative to the present day. So like the first collection, it asked school leavers on Sheppey to imagine their lives from the point at which they left school. But we get a very different story. So for Sheppey's young people in 2010, we hear, actually broadly speaking, the general themes were the same. So they still talked about things like health and family life and leisure activities, but they talked about them in very different ways. So the students from the present day Sheppey imagined quite well paid, instantaneous jobs, included things like signing a contract for football or singing. There was a lot of choice in their lives, but also a lot of uncertainty. So we also clearly see the influence of celebrity culture, which again is something that the researchers kind of really focused on in some of their publications. And you get a feel for this restudy from looking at the quotes there. So you can see how young people in 2010 had a very different view of the world from young people in the late 1970s. So one boy had written that he had an amazing band and toured the world 3 times and sold 4 million records. Another thought he'd like to own a 3-bedroom luxury villa, a helicopter, and a Bentley. And finally, the girl at the bottom who wanted to be anything from a dancer to a hairdresser to a horse rider. And if a dancer, her dream would be to dance for Beyonce or someone really famous. So quite a shift in possibilities for young people today. In terms of the impact of this particular study, it's quite different from the last refuge. So as part of the restudy, Graham Crowe and Don Lyon engaged with the community on the Isle of Sheppey and actively sought to involve them in the process of data creation and analysis. So as part of that initiative, they created the Living and Working on the Isle of Sheppey website. And on there, at least while it was active, they had an archive so that the community members could see the original study as well as what had been added as part of the restudy. So it gave the community a bit of a written and oral history, which also engaged them in exploring their community from different perspectives. And they also did some videos and art galleries and had some audio files as well, so people could really experience the lived memory of their community. Okay, and for the third study that I wanted to look at, this one is a quite well-known mixed method study called the National Child Development Survey. And it follows the lives of over 17,000 people who were born in the same week in 1958. So, at this point, those participants are still surveyed every several years. So the participants have been in surveys, I think, about 10 times since the initial contact in 1958. So initially, it would have been the parents filling in surveys about their children, and then increasingly, there would have been engagement with the child themselves to start actively being involved. And one of those waves happened when participants were about 7 years old. So the information that's collected is absolutely comprehensive. So it includes information on physical development and education, economic circumstances of the parents and family. In later waves, it talks about their employment and their health, their well-being, and their social participation. So it's sweeping in terms of what's included there. So from a standpoint of quantitative data, it's really, really good. But what makes this collection, I think, even better is this qualitative addition. So this qualitative bit happened in 1969 when the kids were aged 11. So they were asked again to actually answer some of the survey. And what they were asked to do at age 11 was a similar kind of essays as the school leavers, but not project quite so far. They were asked to imagine they were 25. And they were asked to project 15 years ahead and say what happened to them. So there were over 500 essays that were collected. Some of them are just a few lines. Some of them are little paragraphs. But what's really valuable about this collection is twofold. One is that it's actually quite a large sample size, particularly for a qualitative collection. And the second is that you have the quantitative data to compare with what actually happened to them at age 25. So not only can you look at what they thought would happen, but you can go back and look at the surveys and the quantitative data from their lives at age 25 and now also 45 and 55. And there was another wave when they were 60 back in 2018. And you can actually see how things unfolded for them. So there's been a number of articles that are written using that data collection. Jane Elliott, whose publication looking at gender is on here on the screen, is probably one of the best known to have used this data set. Okay, so hopefully by now you're thinking that reusing qualitative and mixed data is a great idea, looks really interesting, and now you want to get your hands on some of it. So let me go through how you can do that. And you can do that by using our data catalog, which is aptly named. This slide kind of just goes through how you would conduct a search if you were looking for something which required a filter on two different criteria. So when you click Find Data at the top of our homepage, it would bring you directly to the data catalog. You would just scroll till you see this really tempting search bar where you can begin your search. And once you start searching, a left-hand menu is going to come up with some options for filtering your search. So here I've filtered by qualitative and mixed methods data, and I've also specified here the United Kingdom. And I've just picked a general search term of food, and you can see here there's 44 results here where food is mentioned somewhere in the catalog record. So it could be mentioned in the abstract, in the title of the collection, in the keywords or key subjects that it covers. So somewhere in there, it'll mention food. And you can see that there's a couple of examples here: consumer trust and traceability, older people's perceptions of and experiences of strengths and vulnerabilities in the UK's food system. So that's basically how you do a search. There are other types of filters here. If you wanted to continue to narrow down the results that you've got, there is a whole separate workshop and guides that are available if you need further information about using our data catalog and how to find data. But we also have a unique way to search for qualitative material specifically, which is QualiBank. And this is an online resource that allows you to search, browse, and cite qualitative materials. So you can get to it by clicking QualiBank, which is just below the search bar in our data catalog, or you can just add to the UK Data Service.ac.uk website, just add /QualiBank at the end, and it'll bring you there as well. But QualiBank addresses three key issues that arise when you're trying to reuse qualitative and mixed methods data. So I'll explain some of those as we go along here. But in short, these are finding data, recontextualizing the data, and citing the data. So let me show you a little bit more features, and we can go through each of those issues. So if you wanted to search using QualiBank, it works. I mean, it works in the way that any kind of search engine would work, and in the way that our data catalog works as well. But instead of just searching through the catalog pages, it actually searched through the data itself. So here I've tried typing in typhoid. And when I typed this into our data catalog, it got it didn't get any hits at all. But because this actually searches through the data itself, it'll scan through the transcripts to find where typhoid is mentioned. And when we do it that way, I got 22 results off of our QualiBank search. But what's quite interesting as well is that we have a limited number of collections at the moment in QualiBank. We're continuing to add to it. And so, this is something that will expand, but we certainly don't have all of our qualitative collections here, and we still get quite a lot more. So if you're looking for qualitative data that specifically has a keyword or concept in it, you can use QualiBank to search through the data itself rather than just the catalog record. And I think this really is a key issue in reusing qualitative data, because how do you find the right data for your project? The nature of qualitative data is such that it's, rich and in-depth and detailed, and could potentially answer quite a lot of different research questions beyond the ones that the original investigators chose. So taking the time to familiarize yourself with those data collections could be quite time-consuming if you're searching a topic which, returns a good number of collections. But QualiBank helps to resolve some of this by searching through the data itself. So hopefully you have a better idea of whether or not the data is right for your project. So at the moment, we've got about 50 collections that are in its database. But as I said, this is something that will expand in future. You can also browse through the data. So if you know what collection you want to look through, or if you have a certain criteria for a participant's age, gender, socioeconomic status, or region that they're from, you can refine those characteristics using the left-hand menu. You just need to hit refine after ticking any of those browsing facets. Otherwise, the search won't take that facet into account. But yeah, you can continue to refine any search results that you get off of QualiBank. Okay, so from that search on typhoid, I then chose to look at the interview with Mrs. Omison. And you can see the interview transcript that's laid out on the page. Your search term would be highlighted yellow within that transcript, so you can see exactly where it's mentioned and how it's mentioned. But what's also nice about QualiBank is that it links to external resources, which you can see here, that's circled at the top of the page there. So if you click on that link, it would bring you to the bottom of the page after the transcript finishes, and you would see that there's a variety of resources related to this particular interview. So this one happens to have an audio extract of the interview, a book abstract, on the Edwardians. There's a couple of images that are related to the collection, and there's also metadata on the participant. So it's really a useful tool to help you contextualize that qualitative data. And this added context, whether it's accompanying audio or expanded discussion on the data from the original investigators or some other project which reused the data, I think that really helps to recontextualize that data, and it'll help you understand the limitations and opportunities within the data. So again, QualiBank gives you this, directly by actually linking to it on the specific data file page. Finally, there's also the ability to cite using QualiBank. So we all know how important it is to cite your work properly, and that, this is no different when you're reusing data. So QualiBank automatically generates citations for you, which you can copy paste into your work. So you simply would click Create Citation, which you can see in the left-hand menu there, and then you would highlight with your cursor the portion of text that you want to cite. That Create Citation button will turn into a Retrieve Citation button. And then when you click on it, a small pop-up window will automatically appear with that citation there. So this is what that looks like when the pop-up comes up. That citation is very specific, though, because it directs viewers to the specific passage that you've highlighted within the transcript. So if someone is looking at this citation, they would be able to click on the persistent identifier, that URL that's at the end of the citation, and it would bring them specifically to the highlighted section of the transcript. They might need to log in. If it's a safeguarded collection, they would need to log into QualiBank to view it. But once they're logged in, it would bring them to that specific section of the transcript. And this addresses the third issue in reusing qualitative data, which is all about evidencing your conclusions. You don't just cite the general collection or even, a specific transcript. You can actually get a much finer grain reference so others can see the quotation in the full context of the interview or data set. And I think this really helps to add weight to your conclusions and demonstrates transparency to your processes and analysis. We are still working on some of the features of QualiBank, as well as some of the support materials to help you use it effectively. But if you do ever have any queries about it, please feel free to get in touch with us. Okay, we're now going to do a quick activity to help you get acquainted with the data catalog. So there's a worksheet, hopefully that Gail's going to pop through. Thank you. Finding data task. So if you go ahead and click on the link that is in the chat right now, I'm going to just pause my share and bring it up. And bring up this worksheet so you can view it on this page as well. But I'm just going to give you a few minutes now to have a look through and see what kind of data that you can find. So hopefully this is now showing our worksheet. Yes, excellent. So I'll give you a few minutes now, and you just go to our data catalog page and just start searching and see what kind of data sets come up. See if you can narrow down the search using the facets on the left-hand side. Yeah, I'll leave that with you, and I'll give you about 5 to 10 minutes for this. If you have any questions that come up, please do pop those in. I'm going to look now at the Q&A and see what else has come up. So we've got a question, how do we navigate to the page that allows you to search by data type? So if you want to search by data type, you can either use the facets on the left-hand side, like once you're in the data catalog and you're doing a search, you should have some options on the left-hand side, which include to browse by data type, or when you go straight to the find data, you just need to keep scrolling down that page. It's further down past the search bar. Let me just see here. Yeah, you can click on browse and access data, and you just keep searching past the themes to browse by data type. So let me see if I can get my UK data service. Let me pause my share for a second while I get this up so I can show you, because I think these two questions are related. Here we go. Let's do a new share here with find data. I'm going to resume share. Excellent. So this is where it takes you. So you can browse and access data, and you have to keep scrolling past the data catalog, past the theme, to then browse by type, right? And you'd be able to click on qualitative and mixed from there. And then the facets on the left side appear when you actually do a search. So if I search for food, your facets are going to appear here. So I've got here, I've got 70 collections here. Sorry, 699. What am I saying? This is page 1 through 70. So 699. But if I filter by data type, we've got 140 right now that are coming up. But you can also change it to sort by country. You can also see which ones are open versus which are safeguarded, which I believe I'm going to talk in just a little bit about some of the access restrictions that you might find, but hopefully that's helpful. Okay, let me just check again. Excellent, they've got it now. Perfect. We do have some questions coming through. So I'll take just a couple of minutes now just to go through a couple of these because I think they're good questions. So the two that I did answer is somebody asked if we can narrow down, if you're browsing by theme and you've picked a theme, can you browse by data type from there? And you can't. It's based on theme only. So if I go back to find data and browse data type, so if you're actually within some of these, you wouldn't be able to search via data type from here. I mean, some of these it becomes more or less obvious, that they're statistical. It would just be a couple of collections. Usually in each theme, we try to find at least one or two that are also qualitative and good examples. But yeah, there's usually about a dozen in each of these themes. You can't browse by type from there, but you can, like I say, browse by type this way, and it'll bring you to the data catalog to show you all of our qualitative data. Somebody's also asked, when you're searching in QualiBank on a topic, sometimes the term is only used once. Is there a way to specify the keywords as well so that it kind of is, the data catalog is what will search through the keywords and subjects and abstract. QualiBank is going to search through the data itself. So QualiBank tends to unearth some of the search results that you might not have found through the data catalog. It's something that's mentioned, but isn't something that the original investigators thought was particularly salient for their research, so they might not mention it themselves. So yeah, it's really just if you want to expand out your search and see. We sometimes get questions like, are there any collections which cover this? And some of them are really challenging topics like, child abuse or something like that. And if you search through the data catalog, you don't always get a lot of hits on those sorts of things. And this is where we would say, well, you can try some keyword searches through the interviews themselves, saves you the time of actually diving into collections that may or may not actually cover that. So it can be useful if you're not coming up with any hits in the data catalog. Can also be useful if you're looking for something quite niche as well. Somebody's also asked about the living and working on the Isle of Sheppey. And if I can just pull up, now I'm trying to remember the SN off the top of my head. It's the school leaver study. So for this particular one, it is a community study. So there are other collections related to it, but they're not called the Isle of Sheppey. So if you go to resources and open up studies, these are the related collections that are all part of that community study, but they all pull on different themes. So they'll all be interconnected, and every study is going to have these connected resources. So if there are other collections, if there's different waves, or if there's other collections from the same research, like sometimes we get research that was divided into different work packages, for example. So they might have 4 different collections, which are all part of the same funded research project. All of those would be ideally connected under related resources. Some of it depends a little bit, like when we're creating the abstract, whether or not these have been identified to us. Or sometimes we'll go through and we'll try and find, for example, people who have reused our studies, and when we do, we'll link it. But it is a little bit dependent on how much the depositors share with us. But yeah, this is where you can find the rest of them from that. Okay. I'm just looking at some of these other questions that have come up. Can we combine using the search on the main site with QualiBank? So if you find something in the data catalog, but then use it in QualiBank. So I see. Okay. So the study number for each collection, like this one's 4860, that will be the same across both the data catalog and QualiBank. They're pulling from the collection is always going to have that same study number. It's a unique identifier for that specific study. So if you found something in the data catalog, which you then want to use QualiBank to explore those transcripts a little more, you can do that. So you can also refine your QualiBank search via collection. So if you look at the left-hand menu, once you've started a search, when you look at the left-hand menu, you'll see one of the facets you can refine by is the collection itself. So you can search through interviews of a single collection. So hopefully that answers your question, but if not, do let me know. We can come back to that too. So some tips on search terms. We do have more resources on some of the search terms using the data catalog and that. So you can look at our FAQ, and we've got some further things listed there. But it does recognize Boolean logic. So if you use things like and or minus or those sorts of things to help refine quotation marks, that sort of thing, it will recognize those within the search. So you absolutely can, if that helps you kind of like search for 2 words at once or to search for this and not that, you can use those Boolean logic to help your search. There's one last question I wanted to, it's just a little bit, I went to browse by data type. Oh, Catherine, I'm not sure I understand this. So you were browsing by data type, then selected qual and mixed methods, and then you changed your search terms, but it got rid of your data type filter. Is it possible to keep keep it as a default filter? You'll just know, I think you would need, with every new search, you need to select your refinement with each new search. I think that's what you've asked here. But yeah, you would need to reselect it with each one. Let me just pause my share and go back to my slides and resume share. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So hopefully you can see my screen again. Okay, so hopefully that was useful just to kind of get to grips a little bit with how our data catalog works and how it's a little bit different from QualiBank, and how you can use both of them to refine for qualitative. But do keep sending in some questions if you've got any. We do always have new data coming in, like literally we release something, usually every day we'll release something. You can sign up for our JISC email list if you wanted to keep abreast of what's been released that week. We usually get a weekly digest email going out via our JISC email newsletter that will tell you what's been released that week. What I've covered so far is a few very specific examples of collections and reuse projects. But I just wanted to pull up some examples of some of the more recent acquisitions, just to give you an idea of some of the things that are always coming in. So we do have quite a lot of data building up on, for example, Brexit and COVID, LGBT rights. There's some collections coming in on climate change as well. And we often get collections on that are done with quite vulnerable and hard to reach populations like refugees and children. There's a lot of international collections as well. So research that's been conducted in Africa and Asia, for example. The collections are always being updated as well. So we'll get the new collections in, we'll make those available digitally, and it becomes part of the growing archive. Sometimes if the research project is ongoing, we'll even get new editions of those collections as well. So if we get like a second set of interviews that comes in later, we'll update the original so that we get a second edition of the collection. But this gives you an idea of some of the things that have come in. I kind of just searched, what did I do? I searched via qualitative collections, and then I changed it to look at what was most recently. I did the search by, you know how you do the relevance or the low to high? I just did it by the most recently acquired ones. And I kind of went through the list and just picked out some of the ones that I thought were just a bit different from each other, give you an idea of some of the range that we're getting in. Okay. So yeah, quite a lot there really. And there's quite a lot of stuff that's coming in of research that's ended in 2023 and 2024 as well. So it's worth always kind of having a look and see what inspires you there. So I just wanted to use the final parts of this presentation to talk a little bit about access and some other tools and resources that would help you get started once you've found data and you've got a project in mind. So data is freely available to anyone who registers with us. Now, we do have material that's held under different licenses. So for example, we'll hold some open data, which is freely accessible to anyone. You just need to go onto our catalog page and you can download it straight from there without doing anything else. But most of our collections are going to be safeguarded data, which means that you have to register. We hold that and sometimes there's some additional restricted conditions under safeguarded. So if it says it's under embargo, for example, it just means it's not available for download for a specific time period. So usually that's no more than a year, but it'll vary based on the collection itself. It might also have some permission-only access. So that's something that we would arrange. You'd put in a request for that particular collection, and we would contact the depositor and ask them if it's all right for this particular project to reuse this data. They approve it, and then we release the data to you. That process, it usually just takes a couple of weeks to sort that out, but we do have some special restrictions under our safeguarded collections as well. And then we also have controlled data, which at the moment only applies to quantitative data sets. And this is usually data where there's a particular risk of disclosure because of certain variables. So with the data that's currently in our what we call our secure lab, that's usually because there's a variable in there which specifies the postcode, for example, which of course narrows the population down considerably and makes it that much more potentially disclosive. We don't currently offer any qualitative collections under controlled. Usually if it needs extra safeguarding, we would put a permission-only access. It's something that we might change in future, so keep an eye on this. We might someday be able to offer things through our secure lab, but at the moment, we usually apply additional restrictions under a safeguarded license for any qualitative collections. All the conditions that are, listed here then for qualitative collections would be available to you as long as you register and sign our terms and conditions. And that usually means that you're using the data for a non-commercial purpose. And that's basically it. I think I'm going to go through in a minute just a couple other terms and conditions. I actually can't remember now if the next slide has them, but I'll cover it before we go, what some of those terms and conditions are. It's probably also worth saying that data are available in multiple formats. So for qualitative data, this is usually text-based data, and you'll most likely get something that's like a word process document or a PDF. We do hold literally a couple of collections that have used some sort of qualitative software package. We do also hold image, audio, and some video as well. There's not very much of that because it raises a number of data privacy concerns, and where that is offered, it would certainly be under safeguarded with permission-only access for that sort of thing. But we do take some of them, so it's something to bear in mind. You may find some image data and that sort of thing within our collections. So for registering, if you are based at a UK university, you would use your username and your password to get you in. If you are not associated with a UK university, you would need to make an application to us. And assuming that you meet the criteria and agree to the terms and conditions, you'll then be issued with a UK data service specific username and password that would get you access to the data. And it would probably take me longer to actually read this out to you and explain registration than it is to actually do the registration. But when you do register, you do accept the terms and conditions of what we call our end user license. So it's a bit like online shopping. You go to log in, you go to register, and it's the same kind of process that you've probably done with other websites where they'll send you an email that you need to verify your email address, etc. And it'll bring you to a page then that you have to fill out some of your information on. And at the bottom, it'll ask you to tick off the terms and conditions. So there's 2 points that I do want to stress about these terms and conditions. One of them is that you're agreeing not to disclose the identity of participants, even if you should discover who they are. in most cases, you're probably not going to be able to identify any of the identities of participants because all of the data has been anonymized. But, theoretically, anything is possible, I guess. So if you should happen to discover incidentally who a participant is, you've signed a term and condition that says you're not going to disclose it. The other thing that you can't do, according to our terms and conditions, is that you can't share the data. And that means with anybody. So if you're working with a research team or if you're a student who has a supervisor, you can't just share the data with them. They would need to register themselves, again, sign the terms and conditions themselves, and then put in the request for access in the same way that you did. We do have lots of resources that are available for students and researchers. So it's always a good idea to, let them register separately, explore some of those. But yeah, those are our terms and conditions. Don't disclose any identities and don't share the data. There are a few other odds and ends on the end user license, so it's worth kind of reading through some of those bullet points. But I think those are the two big ones when we're talking about qualitative data that you should be aware of. So downloading data, again, there's some short videos which walk you through that process, but you pick your data, you write a short description about what you plan to do with that data, and then you assign the data to that use and you're able to download it from there. The video tutorials are really useful. If you've not downloaded data before, you do have to, it's a couple of steps rather than just access the data in a zip file kind of downloads. There's a couple steps in between that, but it is, once you've done it once or twice, it is fairly straightforward. So do have a look at some of those videos to help you through that. But I did want to do a quick activity, which again, Gail, if you're able to pop in the link again to the next activity, and I'll switch my screen in just a moment. So this is one with one of our open collections. So you can see what a download bundle looks like. So what it is that you would be downloading. So there's going to be another worksheet available in the chat with directions, and it's going to ask you to navigate to our collection called Pioneers of Social Research. And because it's an open collection, you can download the data directly from the catalog page without registering and logging in. That worksheet's got a few things to hunt for within that download bundle. I'll give you about 10 minutes to have a look through and see what you think of it. Let me know if you've got any questions. I'll check the chat and the Q&A boxes again, but I'll give you a few minutes with that and see what you think. I will switch my screens if you give me just a moment. And hopefully, let me check my share. This is excellent. So let me zoom in on this a little bit more so you can see. So yeah, if you just go to our pioneers, you can try out the study number in the search bar of the data catalog if you want. Just type in 6226 and it should bring it up, or you can click on the link there. And you should, when you scroll through, and find the purple button that says access the data, and you should see an option to download it like this. And you'll see it's in an RTF file. So this is just a standard open source file format for any kind of word processing software. So you'll be able to look through there. And the idea is just to explore a little bit. So I'll give you a few minutes and then I'm gonna just show you a few things on my file explorer so you can kind of just see a few points, but see what you make of it first and foremost. And let me know if you have questions. So I've just noticed the time, and I think because I was answering some of the questions, time has gotten away from me. So what I'm going to do now, if it's okay with everyone, is just if I can get your attention back, and I'm just going to do a quick browse through the download bundle just to show you a few things. And again, if you have any questions that come up, let me know. So this is hopefully what your download bundle looks a bit like. Now, some of these directories or folders are based on are named rather based on our archival standards. So the MR folder is always going to be your documentation. So when you go into here, you'll notice that, for example, the PDF form will have things that usually make up what we call our user guide. So it's got, consent forms and there's agreements here listed. There's an interview guide. There's also the U list or data list. So if you go into the Excel folder, you'll see there's also the U list there, the data listing there. And that just gives you an at-a-glance view of all of the participants in this study. So every qualitative collection would have one of these data listings, just to give you an idea. These are normally things that in this MRDoc folder, these are normally things that are available openly. They're part of the download bundle, but typically, even if a collection is safeguarded, you would still get something like a data listing and some kind of user guide with some of these sorts of documents in there. You would get that openly available to help you explore the collection a bit. We've also got an RTF folder. So the RTF folder will have your interview transcripts. These also happen to have some interview summaries as well. And it also has these PDF files of thematic highlights, which is specific to this question. I believe there's a book out, there's a publication out, which references some of these thematic highlights. So this was something the depositor wanted within the download bundle as well. But these interview transcripts, you can just open up and you'd see that they are literally ready to go. So yeah, every collection will kind of follow a similar kind of format. And we usually label our directories, our folders based on data type. So you'd get a PDF folder or an SPSS folder or a Stata folder. It just depends on what it is that you're downloading. So hopefully that just gives you an idea of what some of those documents look like and what you can find in a download bundle. And that one was a bit easy because it's one of the rare collections that is actually open. So I did have a question come through that was asking about, are real names used in the collections? And the answer would be typically no. Like 99% of the collections, it would be no. Those are all pseudonyms. It's all been anonymized, etc. But in that particular collection, it was a bit of a unique one because Paul Thompson was interviewing people who were quite well known within their fields. And those interviews themselves are life history interviews. So there's a lot of details that are very easy to check. So in that particular instance, he got explicit consent to share with real names. So there were a few details that were asked to be removed. We still had some ethical considerations of some issues that came up where we wanted to just lightly edit the transcript to keep certain details anonymous. But generally speaking, that's a rare example of a qualitative collection that doesn't have pseudonyms. The rest of them would normally have pseudonyms. Okay, so just to kind of finish off here, we've covered different examples of data we hold, how to find and access the data, but what about the process of actually analyzing the data? And I just wanted to make a point about some of the documents that you would have seen, hopefully, and started exploring in the download bundle that make up the documentation part of the collection, that MRDoc folder. We often focus on the data itself, and we sometimes lose sight, I think, of the importance of the documentation that is available with the collection. So when you start reusing data, the first thing that you need to do is to orient yourself to the original research project. And I think the main point here is to not underestimate the amount of time that it would take to get acquainted with the data set. There might be multiple levels of context to get through in order to really understand the data. So you might have to, not just read the data, but take into account the time of the interview or data collection. You may need to think about the metadata of the participants. Is this a group of single mothers living on welfare, or is this a mixed group of people living on a university? You might need to think about the historical time period that the data was collected or where the data was collected. So really, you need to understand the data set as a whole in order to get at the root of what the data can convey. And the documentation provided with the data set is a really useful starting point for this. It often contains information about the methodology. So in the example you looked at, there was an interview schedule and consent form. You might also see calls for participants, or sometimes it includes segments of publications arising out of the original study or funding applications. I've also seen some studies which have sections that are written up by the principal investigator about particular features of the data set, such as the sample. So, for example, Annette Lawson conducted a study in the late 1980s on adultery. And given the sensitivity of the topic at the time, sampling became a primary focus for her. So she ended up writing a 56-page document just on her sample. So in my time working with qualitative collections at the UK Data Service, I've also seen background contextual material that's taken from the area of research, such as meeting minutes, government pamphlets. There's been letters to participants, so conversation kind of style of back and forth. And all of that would help paint a picture of what was going on around the study. And where that's made available, it would be included in the documentation. So the kind of documentation does vary a lot. And this slide kind of just gives you an idea of what you might find. If we've curated the collection internally, you'll find these are collated usually into a single user guide called a U-guide. If the collection has gone through our self-deposit system, so the research team or PI has curated it themselves, it may be a folder of clearly labeled documents instead. What is available will depend entirely on what was available at the time of deposit, what the research team are able to share or willing to share, and what they might be, what they might consider to be useful in understanding the data. But yeah, so there'll be something in there that is the documentation, and it will look different for every collection. So here's an example of one of our user guides, so you can see what they look like. It's just a PDF document, and you can see they're bookmarked. So this one has an interview topic guide, consent form, sample profile, and the final report back to the funders. So all of them would have this kind of format. And then here's another standard piece of documentation, which is that data list I was talking about, this at-a-glance look at the participants. So usually the first column is some sort of pseudonym or participant ID, and the following columns are characteristics which are useful in getting to know who the sample was. So if you're interested in just using part of the collection, not the whole collection, that data list can help you filter and find the people that you want. And again, those data lists are going to look a little bit different with every collection too. So they won't always have age, gender, occupation, marital status, number of children. They'll vary it based on what might have been important for that particular study or what they're able to share. If there's a characteristic that is potentially disclosive, it's not going to be on the documentation. They'll focus on other characteristics. Okay, and just to reinforce the importance of documentation, I wanted to do one final activity. I think we've got just a few minutes for this. And I'll put up my email address at the end if anyone's got any final questions. And I'll go through the Q&A now just to see what else has come up. But I want you to, there's going to be another worksheet that appears via link in the chat, and it's going to ask you to read through an interview excerpt, which does not have accompanying documentation. But from the interview extract alone, I want you to try and surmise who the participant is. So specifically, what age do you think they are, and where might they be from? Now, one thing to note is that this transcript is a verbatim phonetic transcript. So upon opening it, you'll see that it looks perhaps a little bit different than other interview transcripts you might have seen, and it may take a little more time to understand some of the words because of that. So take your time reading it. We do have just five minutes or so left, and I've got just a few slides left at the end of some of the signposting, but I think this is a useful thing. And once you've read it through a little bit, if you can put through your guess of the age of the participants, that would be great. So into the chat, I should say. So I'll give you a few minutes now. Oh, we've got one guest coming in, around 80 years old. Excellent. The hopefully the phonetic spelling of things kind of it gives away the area a little bit. Another guest coming in, do feel free to add in any guesses once you've. I'll give it one more minute and I'll just move on so that I can post up any of the last final slides of signposting before everyone goes. Just see if we've got any other guesses in the last minute here. So Gail's got another Northeast England, another worksheet here. This is the documentation that accompanies this transcript. And the interviewee is 43 years old, and she is from a Scottish city. The interview was taken in the late 70s as well, which might be also useful to note. But the whole point of this exercise, because I think I probably would have been more akin to some of the guesses that were coming in terms of age. We see grandmother, we think of our own position, and the data comes from where it comes from, not our position. So the whole point of this is just to reinforce that documentation is really important in helping you understand the data and helping you understand who the people are who took part in the research. And I think when we explore that documentation alongside the data, it can help put into perspective what our view on the data is, as well as better appreciating the participants of that data. So if you are going to reuse data, please do always check the documentation, view that collection as a collection of both documentation and data. So hopefully that was just a useful demonstration or illustration. I just had a couple of last tips, particularly for new users. If you go to our help pages, there is more information available about how to find data, how to register and access the data, the kind of data that we hold, how you can get in touch if you've got any questions. So please do use our help pages and our help desk if you have further information. If you have further questions, about any of the information from this workshop. I know it was a really quick breeze through some of these aspects, but hopefully it was enough to just get you started. You can also connect with us on social media. We've got YouTube channel, where we've also got the JISC mail newsletter that you can go to as well. PowerPoint slides are going to be on our events page and the recording on our YouTube. So those are the ones to check first and foremost. We do have reoccurring workshops. So if you're interested in any of the other workshops that are listed here, you can go to our events page. We tend to release the schedule on a termly basis. So we're coming to the end of this term. So the workshops are there's not as many listed to the end of the year. We're going to refresh that in the coming weeks, and you'll get the schedule for the next set coming through as well. And just a few more resources. So I've gone through the support and how-to guides as well as the workshops. We also have advice for data management or those who are in the early stages of their research. So there was a question that came through on research planning. Yeah, we absolutely do get in touch with us, because if you are planning to share your data, if you're at the early stages of your research and thinking about data management, we can always supply some advice as well. If you're involved in multi-university collaborations as well, we're really happy to talk to you about your data management requirements. Yeah, let us know what you're doing. And if you've used our data in previous publications or in teaching, please also get in touch with us, because we can help you publicize that. You might be able to, for example, feature in one of our case studies, or we can put you up on our impact blog, etc. So please do get in touch with us if you're using our data or if you've got questions about data management in general. All right, thank you everyone so much for attending, and hopefully we'll see you guys on our user lists and reusing our data. And if you do, we'd love to hear about it. So do get in touch and let us know.